All right, welcome to the Red Kelly Cast. We're back. We're a little bit shorter time length in between sessions than usually, but only because we had a couple more things we wanted to say about the Labour Party and the current stuff that's going on between them and unions. So since we've recorded, some things have been happening, but most notably, obviously, this isn't shaping well for Labour, to the point where they've started campaigning in Sydney and they've had to use hard help to run their campaigns because, in the past, this is what unions would do. And, yeah, shockingly enough, the relationship between Labour and unions isn't so good right now. So they're not getting a whole lot of help from the actual working class, interestingly enough.
And we've seen from their history how this goes when they alienate the unions, because they've done this before.
Yep. And even in the last election, they had a lot of help because they were campaigning. One of their campaign promises was to abolish the ABCC, and a lot of CFMU members were backing that. It'd been a corrupt commission for a long time, and now look what they've done.
Good job, Labour. You destroyed your support.
Yeah.
But they won't look at it that way, of course. It's their job to ruin themselves every now and then, or at least appear to do so. It's their role within the two-party system. Liberal, you can present as a cartoonish evil. Labour can sometimes come from down from on high and present themselves as a saviour.
I mean, that's exactly right. That's kind of what they always done. And, we talked about this in the last podcast, but they use their whole position of the lesser of two evils to kind of get in. And I wouldn't say intentionally infiltrate because that would kind of imply that there's some insidious motivations behind it. But it's just the fact that their structure is flawed from the foundations. Their principles that they're based upon as a neoliberal party, that's what they are, runs contradictory to the interests of the working class people. So the moment that they start getting involved in working class movements such as the union movements, it's inevitable that things start falling apart and that they start attacking the working class.
Yeah, it could be they want to help the workers. Maybe they think this is the way to do it. But yeah, they're split between the workers as a base of their party, where they get all their votes, their material support and all these things. But they get their money from rich donors. They get their money from the corporations, the same people Liberal do. They have the same class support.
Well, yeah, but they also got their money from unions as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what this has shown is there is a need for unions to really disaffiliate from Labour, This is a party that's not on our side. It's not in the best interest of workers or unions to be affiliated with them in any way, shape, or form. And, I understand, you got to play the system and stuff like that, but I think it's come to a point where they're that antagonistic that it really doesn't benefit any union whatsoever to have any affiliation with the Labour Party.
They're completely compromised.
Yeah.
I think also it's seems to be another way of people getting into politics as well, where, politicians these days, they're not really working class, so you kind of have to come from a certain background or be a professional of some kind, whereas some people who come from different kind of a more working class background, they can see themselves as a politician in this way and they come up through the unions to do that. But everyone knows that once you become a politician, your interests no longer align with those same people. And also, unfortunately, if you don't have a good analysis or of the class struggle and that you could really think that you're doing something here while you're just actively harming the working class.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the best way to get a good analysis of the working class is to be a worker.
That helps.
So I've heard people, at leftist events speak on working class issues and stuff like that. And I've heard people come from a place where it's all theory and it's not on the ground. And it's just the most useless useless platitudes that you can kind of think of. And we need real material change and real material differences for any working movement to be effective. And if career politicians are leading the way of unions, then you get a useless union.
One other thing about people who come up working class background but haven't actually been a worker a lot of them times themselves, and they come up through the unions with the goal of becoming a politician, is that it comes from a paternalistic kind of way.
I will do this for the workers.
Yeah, exactly. It's that I know what they need because I have a good analysis of this, or I know what they would want, and I will enact that for them rather than elevating people who actually. And that's how you also get this white collar working class movement. Where the white collar unions are more the people in white collar unions are representing the entire union movement more often than not. Most people at the ACTU aren't exactly people from CFMEU kind of industry, and they believe that they're kind of representative of the union movement and the working class, when that is not it.
We're not getting many Sparkies coming in heading the ACTU or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And we could.
Yeah, but the thing is, we don't know about the poor people having an analysis on things. We don't know.
Yeah. This is just it's a issue on like how the Labour Party, not so much of how it's formed, but how it quickly transformed into, like the Labour movement in terms of, when I mean Labour movement in terms of the ALP, like it started off the back of strikes of, I don't know, what was it, shearers? Yeah, off the back of strikes of like shearers in New South Wales, I want to say. Yep. All right. I'm saying the right states and stuff. And it took them like 10 years before they're already receiving like criticism from, I don't know, our boy Lenin, for instance, who very quickly recognized them as, okay, yeah, it's a labor movement, but only in like a very neoliberal context. And it's like starting to look more what the British labor movement was. And by the time they end up taking their seats in parliaments, it was career politicians. And this was only over a span of 20 years. So they effectively formed and straight away adopted this attitude towards workers that we're like still experiencing today. So from their inception, they haven't really been as effective in terms of workers' rights. We'll get into it later how, socially, sure, like once again, we're talking about a lesser of two evils here, but in terms of furthering the workers' movements, which, we believe is a socialist change, they haven't been the party for that from the start.
I think also the timing is an interesting thing to take into account with the beginning of the Labour Party, that the timing with, the Bolshevik Revolution and also World War II, that there was a lot of communism on the rise, there was a lot of fascism on the rise, but the Labour Party wanted to make sure that they were legitimized in their position as a party that's in this system, and they were very anti-communist, so they had to take a stance that was, and of course there are a lot of communists in trade unions, so in taking an anti-communist position, they had to take a strong anti-labor movement position, and all in the name of anti-communism, but it just harmed the workers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's, that was the whole thing with Ben Chifley. Or do I want to say Bob? No, I want to say Ben Chifley.
No, Ben Chifley.
That was a whole thing with Ben Chifley in the 1940s with the coal miner strike, sending the military in to break up a strike. This was the first time ever that the military state power has been used to oppress workers this directly. I mean, I'm not saying that it has happened before, but in this tangible sense, in terms of breaking up a strike, and it's been used ever since by like many other prime ministers. There's like a list of at least 10 that I had in front of me before. But and yeah, Labour was the first one to do that. And because of exactly what you were saying, Emily, they wanted to set themselves saying, we belong to this system, and this system is anti-communist during the 40s and 50s. Yeah. So they used this guise of anti-communism to attack workers and break up strikes and things like that.
Ben Chifley stared down the barrel of the camera and said, I'm going to start the Australian Red Scare.
Yeah, pretty much. And fun fact, after his tenure as Prime Minister, went on to find ASIO. So
Thanks.
yeah, thanks for that.
They were also the ones that brought in the legislation in 3 days
Yeah.
to ban people from being allowed to share funds to help
Sorry,
work
it was
it.
actually 2 days. But
2 days.
Yeah.
So worse.
Yeah, exactly.
Got your numbers wrong. We're gonna have to kick
Yeah.
you the point.
Good luck. Anyway,
Good luck.
2 days to pass legislation that would not allow people to have a strike fund, basically, to help people's families so they could stand against exploitation, which, that's very pro-labor of them.
Yeah, great work.
Yeah, that's feeling a little familiar right about now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Going right at the administration, how the unions work and how the money moves in the union, instead of only sending in the troops. Like going right at how unions work to break them. That's feeling very familiar.
Yeah.
But it's also there's just a clear moment where anti-communism always means being on the wrong side of history. In any way, when people become anti-communist and they're taking a stance based on anti-communism, they're usually on the wrong side of history.
I'm sure there's like a really good material analysis of why that's the case. I mean, it's almost like it's a party formed around representing a certain class, but
You can take some shit analysis and
Yeah.
even realize that, and even liberals realize that like anti-communists are on the wrong side. They laugh at like the McCarthyites in America and their Red Scare. But then, of course, they repeat the same thing now.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not going to accuse the liberals of having good analysis.
Yep. And, under all this anti-communist rhetoric, it was attack on the working class people and the general public, like, by no means was Australia on the side of the communist or pro-communist. There was not a friendly sentiment to communists in Australia during the 50s. But what did end up happening is Labour certainly didn't get into power for another 30 years because the betrayal of the workers is still a betrayal of the workers, like whether they're communists or not. And the general public picks up on that. Like we see that happening now already. I don't think that they're going to get a majority government next election in March.
No.
So back then, like it took 30 years before Labour got back in.
Yeah, like we always joke about politicians just being liars and snakes and all these things.
Yeah.
But it hits a bit different when you see a party go directly against their voting base.
Yeah, totally.
I think it's also just having a weak position. Like, most people want to see their leaders taking a position, taking a stand, and it's just when they have no backbone and they have no actual principles whatsoever.
Yeah.
Why would you want that party?
It's the exact same case with the Democratic Party in the U.S. It's like,
Yeah.
what
do you stand for?
Useful? Yeah, exactly.
Who are you? What do you want?
It's time for you to look inward and begin asking yourself the big questions. Who are you? And what do you want?
Channeling Iroh at Kamala Harris. I did mean to say that, but I didn't mean to go for the Avatar chorus.
Oh, man.
So would we say that the reason that Labor got in next as well was, due to a lot of frustration with, conscription to the Vietnam War?
I would say that was a big one.
A big one, yeah. There was a big peace movement around that time, and people really didn't want to be following. The last big major war that we were in was World War II, which that was a just kind of cause. We could all rally around anti-Nazi, being anti-Nazis, but. This one just, there was no reason, and there was absolutely no reason for us to be involved with America's wars.
No.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. And it was just in general, I think there was a general sense of progressive social movements during them. And, like, to give Labor their credit, like, that's what Gough Whitlam did when he came in. And I think that that's also a big reason why he got voted in as well.
Yeah,
He adopted...
No surprise it was him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he adopted a lot of social reforms.
well, he abolished the White Australia policy,
which
was a big one. He also banned conscription and extricated Australia from Vietnam. He introduced the Racial Discrimination Act, and he recognised the People's Republic of China, normalising relations with them for the first time since the revolution. Based,
yeah.
He abolished tertiary education fees.
Yeah.
And the death penalty.
Yep.
So we, the final execution was before he was in, but he brought in the precursor to Medicare, Medibank, that it used to be. Introduced legal aid as well.
You do have it in front of you, okay.
But yeah, and also the Aboriginal land rights too. You know, that was a major one that
Huge.
there had been just nothing but disrespect until then to Aboriginal people, and
I mean, even from the Labour Party, like we didn't mention this coming in, but when they were founded, it was a working class party for a very certain type of worker. You know,
most of them were pro White Australia policy.
Exactly.
They were white supremacists, and that's not even, that was actually their ideology. That when you look them up, it says they were white supremacists because
even Wikipedia has to admit it.
Yep. And also the another big one with Gough Whitlam was what he did for women as well. You know, he had a woman in his cabinet to speak to women's issues. Yeah. But also, you know, until then, if you were a single parent, the only way you could get a pension was if you were a widower. Like, you know, if you were a single mum leaving a domestic violence relationship, you'd get nothing. You'd be, so people were staying in horrible relationships, and he did a lot for that.
Yeah, I think I would look at Whitlam. I look at Curtin. Curtin was cool, but like he was too preoccupied with the wars to kind of do anything. I look
not going to blame him for that.
Yeah, exactly.
There were wars.
Yeah, I look at like Whitlam, and it's like he kind of shows me the most potential of like what Labour could do. Yep. You know, he was still hamstrung. I wouldn't like put him in like top tier or like best political figures of all time, but with what he had to work with, like it was a lot of good work that was done.
Right. One of the things with him as well was that you could tell from the beginning he was there just to do a job. Like he was there to do, because before he had even gotten fully voted in, like fully bought in, he had divided portfolios and with one of his cabinet, one of the members of his cabinet, and he said, "You deal with those, I'll deal with those," and he got to work immediately. And that was, you know, most politicians are just kind of, they start to ramp up their work when election time's coming in. Yeah.
And so this is a figure that had to get shut down and booted out. Like it was he was a problem effectively for the Labour Party.
So you can hardly even say that he's the best Labour can do, because they couldn't. No. He didn't get his full term.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting as well that a lot of the upset with the US, you know, side of things, it came out during the Watergate scandal, and a lot of the Americans didn't even know what was going on. They were just like, "Oh, okay, who's this Gough Whitlam they're talking about in the Watergate tapes?" And that was when we learned that, you know, they were extremely up. You know, Kissinger and Nixon were speaking on the phone about being very upset with Gough Whitlam in these Watergate tapes, and talking about how they weren't going to, you know, whenever Australia needed any help or anything, they were going to ignore it, and that they weren't going to send us Christmas cards anymore. You know, but that was when it kind of came out that maybe the US had a little bit more to do with it than we originally thought. But also the his move towards independence, and, you know, he did have a bit of the republicanism side of things where he wanted Australia to be independent, and that was also a problem. It's also, though, kind of an important point with Gough Whitlam, though, was how bad things went towards the end, that it did take a very sour turn because he had made a lot of these good reforms, but unfortunately once you've set up a capitalist system that is geared towards big business and towards, you know, exploitation, especially one that began in indentured servitude of people, that thrived off a lot of free labour and was still getting free labour until just before that. Really, it was, you know, Indigenous people were still being used as indentured servants just before Whitlam, and I wouldn't even say that it ended there, to be honest. And yeah, so like, you cannot make all these reforms that are absolutely tanking the economy as well, because big business immediately pulls back and says, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, totally.
And he did tank the economy. So it's an interesting point that, like, while he did all these amazing things for the people, you realize that you cannot do that under a capitalist system. It's also, it kind of shoots that liberal dream in the foot, really, that of like, we'll just vote in the right one, the one who's going to do this, that we have voted in the one who really wanted to do these things but was completely unable to because there's constraints in the system.
Sorry, liberals, we had the right guy. Y'all let him go. You let him get ousted.
And like this is like why like progressive politics, this is where it falls apart, because it's based on this ideal system. Do the right things and the right things will happen, but the system doesn't care about the right thing. It's like exactly what you said. Like it just demonstrates it perfectly. If you do the right thing and you put in what's best for the people, if the system is constructed to exploit people, then then you run into these contradictions and things start falling apart like really quickly.
Yeah, if you're going in trying to do the right things by people, you've got the completely wrong idea. So the system, the right things are what grows the most capital.
Yeah.
What creates the most profit. So to them, you've done a horrible thing and you need to be destroyed.
Oh, man.
But yeah, I think even if Whitlam had have stayed in power, who knows if he would have gotten re-elected, because the economy absolutely tanked.
Yeah.
He actually had to pull some of his reforms as well, the wage indexation and everything. He indexed it to go up with like CPI.
Yeah.
So that people didn't have to bargain for things anymore, which, that was great for workers. And it actually ended up that wages were kind of ahead of the curve with things, but it meant that he had to pull that, and he actually ended up pulling some of the other pro-women reforms that he'd done as well. And it's because he suddenly had to make some tough choices. So there's also a bit of an idealistic view of him too, because he was removed, and people say, well, he did all these amazing things, but we have to be realistic that he worked within the frame, like the system, framework of the system, but he also was shown quite quickly that you cannot do that with capitalism.
Yeah. Everyone left of Tony Abbott in Australia is haunted by the future that we didn't get where Whitlam stays in. Everyone's like, oh, what if? We didn't get that.
No, I think Emily's absolutely right. Like you like things probably would have gotten worse and fallen apart. And I think that's like where Bob Hawke, where he comes in, like he made sure, to play by the rules. He understood capitalism and the system, like that image of him being happy-go-lucky, drink a beer, whatever, and stuff like that. Like that itself was actually manufactured, like you were mentioning off the podcast, how American officials knew he was a chameleon, underneath his Australian performance and bravado, there was a very calculated politician who kind of understood the role that Labour, the party, and the worker, both sides of Labour, the roles that they played in capitalism, and he was to make sure that they were going to behave correctly in that system.
Yeah. And also the role that Australia plays in the geopolitical sphere of American empire, really, that he was going to be a part of that, and he would be a very willing and able part of that if he could. And he did become that.
It's not a stretch to say, allegedly, that... So he grew up as a unionist. He was a... union research officer with the ACTU? Of the ACTU. And it's not a stretch to say that he used his union connections to inform consultancy groups linked to the CAA in America about the way that unions operate and work and how strikes and stuff like that happen.
Did that several times.
He was actually, when he did that as well, he was the president of the ACTU.
Yeah, right. Oh, while he was the president. Yeah. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so this was while he was the president of the ACTU that he was giving them information.
Right.
He was doing that for the Americans just because he loved America.
I think it's also that he saw his position, that he could solidify his position in the world, being this... Especially where America was then, that America was, this thing that everyone was striving for, that he was going to build this strong relationship and kind of make our country like that almost. I think he had a bit of a dream of that. Yeah.
Honestly, for things like that, he was probably, in terms of political skill, probably the best politician Australia's ever had. Because that's snakery I've never seen before.
Yeah. I mean, it's really one for the history books, especially when it comes to his...
he was right.
Yeah, his beginnings, beginning in the union movement, being very pro-Labour movement, but how do you go from that to what he became?
You work it into who's the new big boy on the block.
Well, at the same time as well, around the world, there was Ronald Reagan, there was Margaret Thatcher, and there was Bob Hawke, all in at the same time, just doing horrific neoliberal kind of things. Yeah. But he was up there with the big leagues of neoliberalism.
And it's so interesting how you got Reagan, who is the icon of what the Republican movement is. You know, he adopted the Southern strategy. He got the religious fanaticism on board, all that kind of weird shit.
Republican and Democrat movement. He completely.
And then you got Thatcher, who is the icon of what the Tory party represents. And you got Bob Hawke, who's the icon of what the Labour represents. And he kind of
liberals. What are they supposed to do?
Yeah. And Bob Hawke kind of saddled up with Reagan and Thatcher in terms of union reforms with his accord and kind of followed suit with what they were doing.
And also the major privatizations, like devastating. Absolutely devastating to workers and to and also the.
It was the only good thing that Lenin had to say about the Labour Party was like, at least they didn't privatize the bank. And Bob Hawke came along and
he was like, guess what, guys? Hold my beer.
I still got the bag.
Yeah.
Also, Bob Hawke, just to talk shit about him a little bit more, he was a supporter of Israel.
Fuck him.
Let's talk about that.
Oh, man. But
but he was also he was a supporter of Israel, but also a lot of America's military, whatever. Pursuits. And he was, he wanted to follow them into the Gulf War and all of that. Like, it's very obvious where he stood with the United States.
Yeah.
I can't exactly speak to what he was wanting out of that, but I think we could infer what that was about, that he was just solidifying himself and then Australia's position with the US.
If I could take a guess, I would say working with the US closer and closer to gain a closer relationship, get closer economic ties and closer like defense deals, things like that, get their equipment, become part of their system so we can't be decoupled from them.
I think there might even be a little bit of the United States, they weren't always the world superpower. They became that. I feel like sometimes Australia is actually positioning themselves to take over when the United States eventually declines.
Lamau, no. There's a no they want. You're probably right.
Yeah, well, you look at even with the Sun Cable thing at the moment, that if Australia did Sun Cable right, we could actually be, we could be one of the richest countries.
What Russia has with their pipelines into Europe. That's probably like the kind of idea they're looking at.
Yep.
But, and I blame Liberal more than Labour, even though this is Labour shit-talking hours, but I blame...
You can always blame Liberal. They're the cartoon.
I blame Liberal for,
we should talk both here.
Yeah, exactly. The position that we're actually in, where we're just tied to a declining empire that's going to go down, and we're probably
how long was John Howard in? That was also...
Yeah. Oh, my God.
Oh my goodness!
The thing is, we just don't need to shit talk Liberal right now, because who needs to really? They're cartoonishly
It's pretty obvious. Yeah.
They look at Thatcher and be like, "Damn, I wish we could have been that."
But going back to Bob Hawke, I was kind of hinting at this before. It's fine. With Thatcher and Reagan's labor reform rather, Bob Hawke following suit. With the Accord, and this is kind of the real tipping point to like complete destruction of the union movement in Australia and making it lose all its power. I think we mentioned this last podcast, but
I would fully agree. Yeah,
I think also this was supposed to be a joint thing, which if we were in a system that wasn't so exploitative, that unions should be able to link up with the government and say, hey, the economy isn't great right now. We'll agree to, we'll back off a little bit and we'll work together on this. And so in theory, that's a good thing to do, with the Accord, that it was a good thing that, we weren't going to be out here causing, labour chaos and all of that, like all the industrial chaos, whatever, as the Liberals here put it recently, that everyone's causing industrial chaos because there's been a lot of action.
But
the thing is...
Yeah. No, there's one big but on that.
But yeah, so you can never give any power up to these people, because that's when it's, we've just lost all of ours. And
you can only have...
I'm sorry, I was about to compare it to the Gaddafi situation. No, because like, okay.
No, you're right.
No, because you look at two comparable countries that have been overrun with imperialism, Libya and the DPRK, and two were building nuclear programs, of course, and then Gaddafi, he agreed to back off on and deconstruct what he'd been doing with the nuclear program, and he was assassinated, and he was, he lost the country lost everything that they'd built up. Whereas with the DPRK, they would not capitulate to the West and actually deconstruct their nuclear program. And look, they're still going.
Yeah.
Then why don't you invade DPRK? Are you crazy? They have nuclear.
Hey, shout out to the DPRK real quick. Anyways.
I did it. I linked the trade union movement to DPRK. I did it.
Oh, no, I thought you were going to go for
DPRK mention.
I thought you were just going to do like trade union to Gaddafi, not mention DPRK. But like, you're right. Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
No, that's all good.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right, Emily. Like, regardless of what the Accord set out to do, and like it's here. Like I would agree. Like, the economy was so mismanaged with who was before Bob Hawke?
Fraser. Malcolm Fraser.
Before Bob Hawke
the economy was so mismanaged under Fraser that something had to be done, and maybe this was a step that needed to be taken. But yeah, it was the methodologies that was used to get this to happen, that collaboration between the unions, the governments, and the employers. China has collaboration between the unions and governments, but they kind of got a different government system than we do.
I wonder why they can manage that and we can't.
But as soon as you start having conversation where the power structure is so indifferent, guess who's going to get everything they want and guess who gets left behind? Like exactly what you illustrated with our boys in the DPRK in Libya.
But yeah, I think as well, because of where the economy was, like the Liberals came in after Whitlam talking about how they are such economic managers as per usual, they do their thing. And Fraser was unable to do that. And actually, funnily enough, that his... who was it in his cabinet that was doing the finance? That it was John Howard, wasn't it? Oh. And they completely lost credibility during that time, and somehow he built it back into becoming prime minister later. John Howard did. But yeah, so Bob Hawke took over at a really difficult time as well. And, Fraser already started the whole deregistration efforts and the inquiries into the union movement, as they do whenever they think that they might need to do something about the unions. And it moved into Hawke, already having that stuff kind of set up for him to do. But I don't think anyone expected him to be such an economic manager in that moment.
Yeah. And that's like why unions were formed in the first place. There's a contradiction in the system of capitalism, whether you're a communist or not, where you can understand that if a structure or a person or a company is trying to extract as much value from a person, that there is a power imbalance there. And as a worker, you need to recognize that your contribution to society, that society falls apart and the whole machine stops moving without your labor.
Yep.
So if we can weaponize and leverage this through uniting and union movements, then all of a sudden you get some power and now you get a voice.
Yeah.
And this goes beyond wage increases and working conditions. This goes to political statements and who's voting in and the way that the government behaves. At Palestine rallies and stuff like that, like I see a MUA flag or a CFMEU flag, then you're thinking this is the way that construction workers feels, or this is the way that dock workers feels, a dock worker would feel. It's because of this united voice that kind of is enabled by a union movement. And you could look at a union that way, or you could look at a union another way. Rosa Luxemburg in her book, Revolt versus Revolution or something like that. Yeah, Reform versus Revolution. Revolt and Revolution are the same thing. Reform and Revolution. She talks about this, how she actually criticizes the union movements in Germany at the time for not being a way to empower workers, but for a tool for the capitalist class to use to make conditions just right enough so that the workers are happy to keep the system going and going. and Labor has fully planted themselves in that position and that's what they see their the uses of union.
It's similar though in the capitalist system how people will go to charity or to philanthropy work to kind of help the system.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it is just helping the system continue on. It's a band-aid fix to a deeply systemic issue, well, many issues. But, a lot of people that I know in my life, they really care about a lot of issues and they will immediately go to charity to fix that. And that is just something that is a band-aid fix and will never actually look at the issues whatsoever.
I think that's an excellent comparison. Like, that moves idealistic people that care very much about a certain issue. It gets them to offload their energy, time, money, and things into this issue to feel like they're helping because, in a small way, they are. But they're doing that instead of working to fix the problem at large because they can't quite do both. And for unions, it's the same. They get people that want higher wages. They want better conditions because, of course, they do. And they get them to get into these unions. You're told that if you want better wages, join your union. Mm-hmm. So you do so. And it's a machine to do those things, but not to build, grow, and use political power for the working class.
It's like that analogy about the environmental activists saying, environmentalism without class struggle is just gardening.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
totally.
What is the trade union movement without class struggle?
Yes.
It's just labor politics. Or,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it's just labor politics. It's talking to the bosses.
Yeah, totally. It's having a one-sided conversation where,
Yeah.
Honestly, sometimes in the system that we're in now, I think a lot about the Duma back in Tsarist Russia and how they had like a fake government where they'd kind of like cosplay like we're
right.
doing politics and you guys have a voice and we're because what is it that like in the union movement now you have to basically do your little application to go on strike and then you have to say we're going to go on strike on this day, and then the bosses who have that in the budget who are just like, I guess we'll allow it now, and if they don't have it in the budget they'll put an application back saying you're not allowed to do this, and the courts will say we don't think you should do that, it might be an inconvenience to the economy right now. It's like it's not even a struggle anymore, it is cosplaying a struggle at this point.
Yeah,
They can budget in our strikes.
Yeah. I think that's the most kind of blatant tell, I think, is the lack of right to strike laws that we have in Australia.
Yeah, and obviously strikes have been something historically that have gotten a lot done, especially the taking away of solidarity strikes is a major thing that, in the Pilbara strike, that was 3 years long, still Australia's longest strike, and eventually the equivalent of the MUA now, they stopped exporting wool out because during that time they were in solidarity, and it was called black bands then. Then there was also green bands from the BLF in New South Wales especially, where they were protecting certain environmental areas that to this day Sydney has a lot of areas that are protected because of the BLF's efforts. So I would say that's important to talk about the BLF and the whole right to strike thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Fortunately, probably won't be able to cover that in the interest of time, but I think, next episode, definitely we could go into a bit to talk about the BLF and, the good stuff that they did, and also how the Accord, affected them and, led to their eventual dissolution. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, part 3, baby.
Eventual part 3 of, ALP is cooked.
ALP's cooked!
Who's that? Bob Hawk. Cool guy.
He could drink a beer fast.
He's got a yard glass
he can drink a beer
record.
fast.
We had no idea how funny PMs could get. We didn't have Tony Abbott yet.
Yeah, exactly. And for a dude who's just... Yeah, Tony Abbott... No.
We hadn't seen a PM, a sitting PM, eat a raw onion yet.
Jeez.
Put your boats out.
We didn't know a sitting PM could shit in the McDonald's.
Oh, man.
Jesus, had a horrible run of them.
Oh,
Sorry.
what are even
What a
electoral
fucked
politics in
country.
Australia?